People understand a little of your background. How did you get here? What's just a little background of yourself, unless you have it in there?
Sure. No, I left it out.
Can you just real quick so people at least understand?
Okay, got into computers when I was very young. Double degrees, computer science, artificial intelligence. National coding champion 3 years in a row. 6th fastest coder in the World Olympics, 93. Been running my own IT company for 23 years. Mostly done work with Oracle, Microsoft, Fujitsu. These are all companies that bought companies I influenced or started. And then also worked with some rather large mutual fund companies for a number of years, managing about 20% of the gross domestic product in the US.
How did you get here? What kind of visa?
It's an EB-11 visa. It's the same visa they give Albert Einstein and Winston Churchill. It's a special classification by Homeland Security when you affect the economics of or the economy of a country. They can transfer it as a national asset.
So which really sucks right now, Al-Qaeda has a weapon pointed at us because they am. They are trying to take you out. No. You're on.
Not quite that bad. So what I try to do here is I've seen a lot of outsourcing. My company, without going into much detail in it, I tell people we're in the business of selling airbags. Unfortunately, we end up selling them at the scene of the crash, which means after you start your company and or you get your funding and you outsource, and then somewhere along the line you call us like the fire brigade going, it didn't work and they didn't deliver and they're holding me for ransom, and unless I give them twice as much money they won't give me the source code back. And that's usually how our customers start the phone calls, and we have to bail them out. So what I tried to do, and the idea behind this is if you listen to everything I'm telling you here, you probably will never need to hire us. So that's a good thing. Second thing is that I try to get to the I believe it's the same root causes for failure when people outsource. And I forget the stat is, like 80% of all outsourced software projects ultimately fail and end up being insourced again. So I'm trying to get
You should repeat that.
80% of outsourced software projects fail and end up being insourced or abandoned. So I try to get to the fundamental root cause of that. And in startups, you know, if it's only 1 or 2 person startup, there isn't a whole lot of space to blame the root cause. It's your thinking. It's how you've got to shift your thinking. And that's what I'm going to try and do today, is try and isolate that root cause that I've seen over and over and over again. And it's shifting that thinking is the only way you're going to be successful at this. The yin and the yang of business. At least I see it this way when I talk to people and see people speak. You're either the folks that make $1, the marketing, the branding, and the sales, and the business strategy folks, or you're the folks that save $1, or in other words, losing $1 is probably more accurate. Well, I'm the yang. I can't help you sell or do more marketing or tweak your business model or tell you what prices you should charge. But if it does start working, I'll tell you how not to lose it all. And the goal, obviously, is some balance between how much time you spend in offense versus defense. This is not the most exciting slide in the world, but this is the cheat sheet for all the categories of risk that you need to manage. I'll take you through them very briefly. Project risk. Is it funded? Do you know what you're doing? Have you got the right resources? Have you got enough time? Have you got enough money to keep it going? Functional risk. Functional risk is typically what you see in your system. It's the things the user is going to see. Do I have a login? Do I have a registration? Can I bid on an auction? These are the things I do. Non-functional risk are the things that most entrepreneurs ignore and forget about. And non-functional risk is the stuff you don't see, but you expect to be there. Backups, disaster recovery, failover, scalability. If it does actually work and I get 1,000 people logging on at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, is it going to fall over or slow down? You know, if I have this third-party widget, can I afford to scale up on that? And do I know when it'll fall over or when I have to start paying extra license fees? So there's a list of non-functional risks. They're typically things you can't see, but are very important. A separate risk type is deployment or configuration management risk. And deployment risk is all about, okay, your developers did a good job, and you did a good job, and you spec'd it, and they built it, and it works. Now, how do I deploy it into production? How do I bring it back to the US? How do I compile it? Where's the IP address? Who sets up the firewall? Which place do I host it at that's not going to charge me a fortune? How do I package it up? And when I got it there, I need to upgrade it next 2 weeks with my next release. How do I do that without bringing the site down? So it's the logistics. It's the FedEx box part of software. Now that I got it, who's got the passwords and the IP and where do I put it? And that is a separate discipline from what the code does. And all too many times folks assume developers will just handle all that. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's not a good idea. Security. You know what it is? It's different levels of importance depending on your site. If your business works, someone will try and game it. And you're going to need anti-fraud solutions and some kind of security around it. BCDR is an acronym for Business Continuity and Disaster Recovery. And again, it's a case of so many companies I go to, they're like, yeah, we back it up. We have this wonderful machine that backs everything up on tape every week. And we take it off-site. We're not idiots. We take it off-site. I'm like, great. So you back it up on tape. You put the tape on top of the machine that you put it in, or it's still in the backup machine, which means one voltage shock or one fire on that machine on a Friday, because you only take it off-site on the weekends, means you've lost a week of data. Can you afford to lose a week of data? Data includes your source code. We'll come back to SPOF risk. Docs and compliance, again, the most boring part of the most boring slide. But if you're planning to exit or be invested in, or again, be able to plug into third-party companies, they're going to come and say, are you PCI compliant? Are you SAS 70 Type 2? If you don't know what those things are and you haven't built them into your non-functional requirements, you're going to have to suddenly scramble and go back and rewrite bits of your system, or they won't plug into you. You have a great idea and you want to plug into a bank or plug into an ISO for credit card processing, and they go, great. Or your whole business depends on continuity models of billing credit cards every month, and you're going to store the credit cards. Well, what level of PCI compliance are you? And docs, documents, requirements, specs, test plans. If you don't have them, spaghetti doesn't sell too well. So when investors come to invest, you will fail due diligence on that point, which will hurt your valuation. You think you're worth $1 million, they go, no, it's going to take us 400 grand to repair you, you're now worth 600K.
I understand this one.
This is my pet peeve. Again, folks getting into technology for the first time, they're thinking the website, they're seeing the website or the iPhone gadget or whatever, and they're like, this is what they're seeing, this is their system. So their company is building one of these. No, you're not. Software is a loaf of bread in an oven factory. And that's my quote, because no one else would say it. What that means is, one of these loaves of bread is your system. The next one is the one you're going to release 2 weeks from now. The next one is the one that's coming 2 weeks from that. And the one that's 6 months out is the one you're working on for the next iPhone or Android that you know you need to work on. So you've got multiple versions of this. You've got a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't even appear on your website or in your system, which is your third-party tools, your docs, your configurations, your source control system, your environments for putting things in. You're going to have an environment for development, an environment for storing your source code, an environment for testing it, an environment for showing and demoing to your customers, and a production environment. Again, you don't have one slice of bread. You've got a loaf of bread going on. So if you think about it, your system has multiple releases going on, and each release has multiple defects and enhancements inside of it. And that's why this gets hard to manage, because you think it looks like this, and they don't speak your language, and they're thinking it looks like this, and you don't know why you're not communicating properly unless you've hired Maya. Okay. This has been published a million which ways and proven many different ways, including by the IEEE. Every $1 change you make to requirements. So you've got your requirements on paper or in an Excel sheet, and you're like, oh, I think I moved this field over there. Oh, I forgot I should add a feature here. Oh, let's rename this button over here. And you're trying to work your thing out on prototyping. Every change you make there is 100 times less expensive than when it's in code and you decide to change it on the back end. So the most expensive way for you to create a piece of software is to start off banging out code and go, we're going to do rapid prototyping. Except if we like the last prototype, we probably won't throw it away, we'll go live on it. That's going to be expensive. So spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. Do as much prototyping, focus groups, paperwork, and Excel sheets as you can possibly stand. It's still cheaper than starting to give it to a developer. And to Odette's point, if you've done this well, and your developer is a B-class developer, not an A-class, it won't matter. Because you know what you want, you know what your product's supposed to do. And when you force yourself to do this, it will ask you a million questions you didn't think of, you've got to answer. Otherwise, the rate of change that you cause impacts quality over time. So this means if you keep changing what you want to do, and you're like, oh, I thought of another feature, sorry I wasn't in the spec, but I had this in, I just had another good idea. Your quality is going to kind of come up, get crippled, and go back down. Because you're now going to fix this and break that, and you're going to have a piece of code that looks like legacy code. And by that what I mean, if you take COBOL code from the 1960s right now, everyone's scared to touch it. The guy who wrote it retired. If you touch anything over here, you'll break something over there. You can be like that in version 1 if you do this, because version 1 is really version 100, because you change your mind 100 times. This is what you want to shoot for. You want to do your best to stabilize the amount of change, phase things, anything that's a bell and whistle, make it a bell and whistle for later, and give a constant steady rate of change so that developers have a chance to not only develop code, but develop the right way and fix the previous stuff as they go, so your quality is slowly getting better. So when you do start doing alpha, beta, and live, you don't scare away all your customers. Some of you may have seen this before, but it is kind of apt, I thought, for today. How the customer explained it. How the project leader understood it. How the analyst designed it. How the programmer wrote it. How the business consultant / sales guy sold it. How the project was documented. What operations installed for you. How the customer was billed. How it was supported. And what they actually just wanted in the first place. Simplicity is the hardest thing to do in software. If I told you, I am going to start, you're all VCs, and I'm going to start a new startup. And my new startup, I decided to outsource these functions to some company in India. So I'm going to have them be the president, CEO, COO, lawyer, VP of sales, marketing, branding, and write my business plan. And they're just one guy, and he doesn't speak English. Would you invest in my company? No?
What's the valuation?
$1 billion. What if I told you the guy has a really big head and is really smart? Would it make any difference? The reason I'm saying this is it's equally idiotic to say you're going to outsource IT. There's no such thing as IT. There's a CTO, there's an architect, a project manager, a business analyst, a developer, a database designer and architect, which is different DBA from a database admin who runs reports for you. There's a quality assurance person and tester, a config manager who knows the logistics of how to package it up and move it around and fail it over. And then there's a tools guy because you're going to end up with tools. Now here's the trouble. You don't got a budget to hire whatever that is, 10 different people. So how are you going to do this? SPOF, my favorite word, SPOF hunting. Single point of failure. In all aspects of everything we're going to talk about and go through in this presentation, you need to avoid a single point of failure. Because it only takes one bad, rainy day, and you've lost everything. So we're going to look at how do we eliminate SPOFs, even though we still need to hire all those people. So those are roles, not people. And those people don't have to be full-time. So I put together here a recommended skeleton of the absolute minimum number of people you can get away with, how you can overlap their roles, and still have no single point of failure. Your CTO, and there are the 3 types Odette mentioned, can be your backup architect, not your primary architect, and your backup database architecture. And the reason I say that is the architecture of your system and presentation layer and functionality is a very different discipline from the architecture of your database. And if you've got a web technology that's going to have 100 people in it initially, but you're hoping to have 200 million people in it eventually, if you have the wrong database architect, there's nothing the programmers or architect can do to stop that thing getting a second slower every time another 100 people join it, until you end up with a 10-minute login period and a massive amount of abandonment rate. So your database architect is just as important as your system architect.
That's called MySpace, by the way. And Friendster.
And a few others I could name, correct. Then you've got your main developer and architect. So anyone with a 2 on him is a backup. Anyone without it is your primary. So this guy's your lead developer. Then you have someone else who's the backup developer, who is a database architect, and is your backup configuration manager. And the same here, you have a configuration manager primary who also does your tools and database admin. And any of these things with an asterisk on them means you don't have to back those up. If you lose that person to get hit by a bus, you'll be okay.
But a lot of those people could be in one person. right?
That, each line is one person. And these are our time. So if you add all this up and these were a third of the time, you're really talking 3 people here, which is reasonable. Any less than that, and you can't really protect yourself as a company.
Can I just say one thing? What you just offered is so brilliant. And if you actually just memorize that, and then you said that to a VC, they would probably invest in you just based on your saying that.
I agree.
It might mean you've been around the block once or twice. Shared services, outsourcing, insourcing, offshoring. Lots of different ways of getting services. The good news about this is they will do exactly what you tell them. And I think we've covered some of this already. Anyone want to guess what the bad news is?
They'll do exactly what you tell them.
They will do exactly what you tell them. So, this summarizes Oded's point. Do you know exactly what to tell them, and what you tell them, is it going to be right? This is a useful graph I pulled off the web. It kind of shows you the inflection point here of when do you outsource, when do you not outsource. Because you're going to have a fixed in-house cost that is going to start growing rapidly as you try and develop things internally. But it is cheaper than a fixed outsource cost to start with. At some point, these are going to cross each other when you hit a level of volume where it's worth outsourcing. And again, a hybrid model is good. Try to keep your architect and your expert and your CM, if possible, working for you here, speaking English in the US, potentially coming on board when an investor comes. If you do that, everyone else is dispensable. There are one group in India or another group in India, they will get them back up to speed 2 weeks later. Don't try and have your experts and your lead architect over there. I know I'm saying India, I've been outsourcing since 1993, but wherever. The savings, the actual real savings from outsourcing, you're going to look at it and go, wow, 16 bucks an hour versus 100 bucks an hour. The actual savings, if you do it right and you're a Fortune 500 company and you outsource completely, are 15 to 30% tops. You're not going to get an 80% savings. By the time you deal with the time zone difference and the fixed overhead difference and the extra guy you had to hire just to speak to them in their language and the 2 project managers to keep them on task and the extra person in accounting just to deal with paying them. Overall overhead, you're looking at 15 to 30% savings, which is huge when you're Microsoft. May not be worth the hassle when you're a startup. And when you hit this inflection point, ask your advisory board, ask your CTO, they should be able to tell you when it's worth doing that. I'll tell you one area you can hit that on early, and that's testing. Because you don't want the guys who build it to be the guys who tested it. So a perfect chance to outsource, try it, dabble in it. If they break it, that's their job, so that's good. But give them a good test plan or they'll just burn hours and not be testing anything useful. Contract risk, how am I doing time-wise?
Okay.
Contract risk, when you do a contract ultimately with these folks, do at least 3 reference checks, and if possible unsolicited ones. Link to them through LinkedIn, find someone who's used them, find somebody who knows someone that they didn't give you, try to get a decent reference check. It's a little tricky because even if you find a big outsourcing firm, they will give you reference checks that sound wonderful. But they worked with the guys who started the firm who are the hottest guys in the firm, and you're not getting them for 16 bucks an hour. So you did a wonderful reference check on someone who will never work for you. The guys you're getting are the guys they hired a couple of weeks ago or a month ago. So interview them directly. Whatever time frame you come up with, in software there's a thing called Cost Expert and a couple of others that go through painstaking detail on how to define the cost of your software project. And lays everything out and all your features and everything else, and at the end it says double it, which kind of defeats the purpose of all that math. But either way, it's not going to be as fast as you thought it was going to be. And put in some sliding penalties and bonuses. Developers are inherently nocturnal, so make them work for it. Tell them, okay, I need this at the end of the month. If you give it to me on the 20th of the month, I will give you 10 grand. Every day later, I'm going to drop $1,000 off of that. And every day past the end of the month, you're going to owe me $1,000. And get them to sign into that. They think they can do it. They said they could do it. They will bust their ass to try and get that $5,000 that they'll ultimately end up trying to get because they're 5 days late. Agile development and QA. Agile, extreme programming, all the different methodologies you've heard. It basically means iterate. Iterate like crazy. And I mean short little cycles. Don't throw it over the fence and say, see you in 6 months. I hope you come back with a good product. You got to talk to them every day. You got to see it every week. You got to have tests every every couple of weeks, so that either you're going to find out in the first 2 weeks if you hired the wrong guys or not. You're not going to get a big surprise at the end. And pay as you go as well. None of this, we'll give you a fixed cost of 100 grand, give me 50 grand up front, and we'll get the rest on the back end. You will never see them again, or that money. Full service level agreement, including response times, coding standards, naming conventions, and a definition of what you mean by support. How fast do you need to get back to you, and how many people, and what kind of availability when your main programmer goes on a 6-week wedding. Defined and detailed UAT. UAT is user acceptance testing. Picture it's already built and they're giving it back to you. And you're going to sit there for whatever, 2 hours playing with it before you're going to pay for it. You are the user, you are accepting it. What do you need to do? If you were sitting there in front of it and it's already built, I want to log in, I want to create a new registration, I want to upload a picture, I want to link to my friend, I want to text this guy a chat message. Write out those use cases and put them in the contract, because unless it does all those things, you're not paying for it. The documentation we spoke about. 2-stage lawyers, just a slightly separate issue. When you do startups, lawyers are really, really expensive. It's very hard when you have to pay that much per hour for folks. I use 2-stage lawyers. I've got a very good contract lawyer who moonlights for me for 125 bucks an hour. He's not brilliant, but he's good. Then I've got really good lawyers who are $400 to $600 bucks an hour. I don't like paying them more than I get. So what I do is I give it to my 125 bucks an hour guy, and he spends 10 hours on it and knocks out all the spelling mistakes and the grammar and the clauses are missing and everything else. And then I give it to the other guy, and he spends an hour on it and goes, wow, this is in pretty good shape. Thank you. So, cheaper pricing. Tips and tricks. There's an old terminology in code that I haven't heard for a long time, but dry reading the code. It's where you write the code, and then you, on paper, try to follow it yourself, so you know every step that it does, and you're trying to go through manually what's going on. Almost any technology, website, system that you develop, you can do it manually on paper. You get enough pieces of napkin, enough straws, you can build your website on the table and follow it around with your finger.
Tell them your world programming championship technique.
It was a bit
It relates to that point, though. I think it'll drive the point home.
Yeah, well, in the championships, you've got 5 problems, big coding problems you got to solve in 3 hours. You got 40 minutes a problem. We spend up to 30 minutes of that on paper figuring out how to solve it. And then we know many programming languages. So we actually pick the one that lends itself best to that problem. And then for the last 10 minutes, we type at 90 words per minute and bang out the code, because it's already written in our heads. And at the Olympic level, they all do that. Otherwise, you just can't get there. I wouldn't suggest that's how you create your software. But what I'm saying here, my point is, it's all the same point we've been making between us all night. You got to know your product. You got to define it. You can't just leave all that as grunt work to someone else. You got to lay out every field, every drop down, every option, every tick box. You got to see it and visualize it and lay it out. Virtualize everything. When you're starting a business, you can run a business for 500 bucks a month. If you're paying more than that, somebody somewhere is ripping you off. Whether it's phone.com or the Amazon cloud for 50 bucks for all your servers, or your email system with Rackspace for $2 a month, or if you want full Bez servers to your BlackBerry, it's 12 bucks a month. Anything over 20 bucks a month, look at it hard, because you can run a business for under 500 bucks a month. Cloud, cloud, cloud. You've heard lots about it. I'm not going to go into it too much. Use it. I've got a couple of slides here to explain it. But basically, in a nutshell, we use the Amazon cloud heavily. Amazon know more about all of this than you do. They also are in 4 continents. They also have about 80 different data centers going. They know more about redundancy and management and antiviruses and security and PCI compliance than you ever will or you can ever afford. So slide your credit card for 50 bucks and stick your stuff there. Don't try and do it yourself in your closet.
Can I ask you a question about that? When you do that, I'm sorry, Amazon sends you this, nice agreement that's got all kinds of small writing on it. And, you're a small business. You're just starting out. They're Amazon. Is it pretty much take it or leave it? In other words, you just sign that form.
Okay, a couple of stats.
And not pay your $600 guy and try and go through it in tooth and nail for changes that they're not going to get anyway.
Just like your
You're not going to get any changes, and here's why. The traffic of the Amazon cloud surpassed the traffic to Amazon.com in the middle of 2007. The Amazon cloud last year served up 80 million servers to people outside of the Amazon cloud, outside of Amazon.com themselves. I believe the revenue just about now this year for the cloud is surpassing the revenue for Amazon.com. If it isn't, it's a few months away.
Wow.
They serve up 50,000 new computers to people like you who request it every month. They ain't changing the contract for you.
And are the
Or me.
servers? And are
It's
the
like,
serv-
it's like downloading Word and agreeing to the contract that you're gonna agree to Word. It's the same
Yeah,
thing.
it is, you're right. Yeah.
But are the basic terms that they have in there, the response rates, the coverage, the things like that,
It's all crap,
adequate?
it's all crap and it's not guaranteed. You gotta know what you're doing.
Adequate for the average business, or should you?
No, do I have time to go into this slightly, or no?
Go ahead, if you can.
Okay, the concept here is simple. The cloud is not magical. The magical thing about it is diversity, same as your investments. So you've got Amazon running the cloud. They've got 4 regions. They run Singapore, Ireland, Northern California, and Virginia. Each of those regions has their own manager who standardizes the clouds at different times. They're not allowed to upgrade them simultaneously. So if you put your system in 4 continents, in 4 regions in the cloud, which doesn't cost 4 times as much, and is just ticking boxes in terms of setup, you got faster response time because whoever hits your website will hit the one that's closest to wherever they live. Even New York hitting Virginia versus California makes a bit of a difference. The second thing is, when they do an upgrade, like if anyone saw the news, the Amazon cloud went down 2 weeks ago or whatever. No, it didn't. The Virginia cluster went down. So if you were in 2 regions, you were fine. And any data center you build or you put your stuff in is just as likely to go down. So I'm not saying they got it right and they don't make mistakes. I'm saying there's 4 of them on 4 different continents who don't upgrade simultaneously. So the chances of all 4 of them screwing up simultaneously are very little. And then we also, in our case, we intercloud, so we sync it to Rackspace every hour just in case anyway. We're a little
So
tired.
there are tricks, there are tricks.
They're absolute
that
tricks.
You should know to fill out that form in a certain way.
If your CTO isn't a cloud architect,
Right.
hire one for 5 hours. It'll be the best money you ever spend.
Okay.
Okay.
Good to know.
I talked about iteration. Really escrow. If you've outsourced or had developers doing code, they'll say, oh, we'll escrow the code. We'll put the code in a vault with some company, and if we ever go out of business or anything happens, you get your code back. Well, hopefully by now, realizing that they give you back a slice of that bread without the whole oven factory behind it, it's completely useless. Plus, they put that slice of bread in there 3 months ago. It's not the one you just used on your site last week. So if you're going to escrow, really escrow everything, which means you have the ability to recreate production from what you pulled out of the escrow. 80-20 your contractors. It's an old trick we used. We used to buy 10,000 machines between Dell and Gateway back when that was happening. And they were all like, we'll give you the best prices if you go with us. So what you do is you give 80% of it to Dell and you give 20% of it to Gateway, and you tell them that each one has those percentages. So when Dell start playing price games with you on their 80%, you just say, well, you know, I'm already hooked up with my logistics with Gateway. I'll just give them 30% instead. So you keep a price war going between both of them, so nobody can hold you to ransom. You can do the same with your contractors, and your developers, and anyone else, as soon as you get slightly big enough to have an 80-20 rule going, whenever you can. Because people will hold you to ransom. The architect's job, and we could talk about the definition of an architect probably for a couple of days. In my view, it's very simple, which is, I agreed with Oded's definition as well for bringing value to the company, but again, I'm the Yang guy. So I'm going to look at it from the other point of view, which is lower your total cost of ownership, future-proof your design, so not to paint you into a corner. So your architect's thinking, yeah, if we use that, we'll save a week now, but it'll cost us a bundle in license fees later on because we're going to have to pay $5 grand a month for that thing when we scale it up in Akamai. That's a good architect. Similarly, they say, well, I can get Magento for $1,500 to run my e-commerce platform, or I can get this other thing for $5 grand where they give us the source code, or where they don't give you the source code, you just buy a product. Well, Magento gives you the source code. That means you can do whatever you like later. The other one, you're going to have to rip it out and pay for ripping it out and putting in something else later. Always try and get the source code if you can go open source. A couple of quotes that are favorites of mine. Good judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from bad judgment. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Unless you have a degree in this stuff, You are outsourcing magic for something you don't understand to a magic land in a magic language somewhere else, and you wonder why it fails. Walking on water and developing software from a spec are easy if they're both frozen. This last quote is how we explain ourselves to our customers at the scene of the crash, which is you have a general counsel. Most of you will hire a lawyer at some point in your business. And you hire them because the legal world's complicated. It has its own language. You need a special education to understand it. Everything you do is going to involve some kind of contract. And if you sign the wrong contract, you're screwed. Well, your CTO is your IT general counsel for exactly the same reasons. It's complicated, it has its own language, you better have a special education to understand it. Everything you do is going to affect your IT, and if you sign the wrong contract, you're
But
screwed.
that's your favorite quote, I'd say.
Came from you.
Cloud architecture, really quickly, the points I made earlier, their data centers. This is one of many of their zones. You're going to have your thing in the closet with one of those little things with fries that gives you the 20-minute backup failover. They have their own substation to generate their own electricity on premises. Sync it across the globe. And unless you've got this in your bedroom, which I do, but it's where the magic happens, right? Monitoring, this hard drive full, that thing ran out, this piece blew, we got a virus over here, this needs a patch, that needs an upgrade, Microsoft just released a new patch. It's not your problem anymore, it's their problem. And then put all that together, and you can make some beautiful music. That's it.
Awesome job. That was a lot of information. Questions? Or is your head still spinning? Can you get a question? Can we get a copy of that deck, Walter? Is that a yes?
Copyright, confidential and proprietary to Ken, so I guess so.
Okay.